Spider-Man Far From Home is coming out in a couple days, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of Raimi's Spider-Man 2 versus MCU Spider-Man 2, I figured I'd talk about the first movie in their respective franchises to see how they stack up. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Peter is the most important character in any Spider-Man story. Without Peter, Spider-Man isn't a thing. Peter in the Raimi films is an absolute loser. At the beginning of the movie, it's like even the universe itself is laughing at him. He's the kind of guy who you'd see sat in a corner, buried in a book, wishing the world itself would just disappear. Just like Peter Parker in the comics. In Homecoming, he's still a loser, but he has more childish optimism. He has a few close friends and that's really all that he needs. He's less likely to be burying himself in a book and more likely to be holed up building tech or fantasizing about being a superhero. Raimi's Spider-Man is more emotionally charged and feels more like Peter Parker, so I'll give this point to him. What's more important to a Spider-Man movie than Peter Parker? Gee, I wonder. This one is a bit tough. Raimi's Spider-Man can come off as unconvincing and stiff a lot, but his action sequences are always a joy to watch. Every scene where he faces off against a goblin is so fun in its own tacky way. In Homecoming, Spider-Man definitely feels much more realized, and gets well around the stiffness problem, but due to a lack of experience, the action in this movie tends to fall flat. I love what they did with Spider-Man and the Iron Spider stuff and all of that, but that just doesn't make him a better Spider-Man. All in all, I can't really decide what makes who better, so I'm just gonna give both of them half a point. There's no beating around the bush with this one. As much as we all love Willem Dafoe and his over-the-top acting, there's no Spider-Man villain who's ever been as compellingly amazing as the Vulture in Homecoming. Between the perfect way that he's portrayed and Michael Keaton's absolutely stunning performance, it's safe to say that this one is pretty cut and dry. Willem Dafoe is amazing, but you need to be the absolute best to top this guy. Point to MCU Spider-Man. Both these movies have very different stories from each other, but they both share the same theme. Both of these movies are stories about Peter learning what it means to be Spider-Man. In Homecoming, it's like the sword is only as strong as the one who wields it, or in this case, the high-tech suit is only as capable as the Spider-Man inside of it. And in Raimi's movie, it's the age-old Spider-Man lesson.
With great power comes great responsibility.
They both overcome trials that are thrown at them, learning along the way what being Spider-Man is all about. In Homecoming, these trials take the form of feeling like he's not allowed to live up to his own potential and having his suit taken away. And in the Raimi films, they take the form of having to watch his uncle die because of his own selfish actions, getting his best friend's father killed to save the whole city, having to abandon the girl that he loves to protect her, and to top it all off, having the whole city turned against him by Cave Johnson.
Miss Brandt?
Yes.
I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down!
5 minutes to deadline, Jonah. All right.
Raimi's movies made me feel emotionally for the characters. For Peter, for Harry, for Norman, for Aunt May. Homecoming was a fun movie to watch, but I didn't feel on nearly the same level of emotions for the characters. This point goes to Raimi's Spider-Man. Spider-Man Homecoming genuinely has some of the best characters in any Spider-Man movie or TV show. Each character in this movie shines in their own way, and characters that are familiar are done in unique and refreshing ways that we haven't seen before. Raimi's characters clearly have a great deal of thought and effort put into them, but even for their time, characters can come off as a bit cliche. And couple that with the fact that Mary Jane is just the most one-note character of all fucking time and keeps getting into trouble because the plot demands it. And honestly, I'm gonna have to give this point to MCU Spider-Man. While the characters in this movie are really good and are done really well, similarly with the villain, the characters in Homecoming are just the best any Spider-Man movie to date has to offer. It's hard to compete with the absolute best. Both of these films have legitimately fantastic soundtracks that are just
Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatball!
But I think there's a really clear winner in this category, because while good, the music in Homecoming has a tendency to fall pretty flat. It is a problem that plagues most MCU movies, and unfortunately Spider-Man was no exception. The music in the Raimi films, however, is just absolutely sublime. Danny Elfman was really bringing his best when he composed the music for these movies. The music reflects the tone of the movie perfectly, and I still sit through the opening credits for all 3 movies in the trilogy, even the one where he didn't do the score, solely because I love listening to the amazing intro music. This point goes to Raimi's Spider-Man. Both these movies have similar settings to one another, but they're used and executed differently. In the Raimi films, it's set in typical New York, occasionally shifting to other parts of the city but staying grounded for the most part. Homecoming, on the other hand, afforded to get pretty experimental with the setting, shifting around from inner city Manhattan, suburban Queens, to Washington DC, and to a jet that leads directly to a beach where the final fight takes place. The filmmakers played around with all sorts of different locations, and in my opinion, it really works. I mean, the visual of Spider-Man crawling up the Washington Monument is something that I never even thought could exist, let alone work as well as it did. Point to MCU Spider-Man. Now, after all that, let's see how the movies compare. You see, the thing is, while vastly different from a tonal and narrative perspective, both of these movies are very similar in that they were both created by incredibly talented filmmakers who had passion and care for their art to be starting points that kick off the rest of the franchise. While obtained in different ways, both these films have pretty much the same merits as movies in general and as Spider-Man movies. Both of these are brilliant films that have good amounts of rewatchability and serve as a great starting point for the greater series as a whole. Well, what do you think? Do you disagree completely? Do you absolutely agree 100% fire emoji? Do you think that my voice sounds weird and want to let me know? Either way, leave a comment down below because I would love to hear your thoughts. And with that, I'ma go bye-bye. See you next time.